Okay, all right. So I make that 10 o'clock. So we'll crack on. We'll crack on with the meeting. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all, and hopefully this is the last meeting that we have online. Yeah, we were just chatting about biscuits. I can't wait. So yeah, anyone that's willing to bring in biscuits to the next meeting would be fantastic. And I'll if I bring in I'll bring in some Marks and Spencer's biscuits as well, and perhaps a little bit of cake, and we can actually have a bit of time and a catch up beforehand. But anyway, it's good to see you all. I have to just quickly run through the housekeeping. So you've all got your cameras off unless you'd like to speak, any microphones off unless you'd like to speak. I just have to run through the fact that at the annual meeting of the council on the 4th of May 2021, it was agreed that all council meetings that are not executive in nature will continue to be held virtually from the 7th of May 2021 until such a time social distancing requirements are removed, currently scheduled to be lifted on 21st of June 2021, which is already out of date. So I think we're going to revisit that, must be on the 19th of July. Where a decision is required, committee members will express a minded to decision in respect of recommendations set out in officer reports, with decisions being undertaken under officer delegated authority in the light of the minded to decisions expressed by members in the virtual meetings. The reports on today's agenda are for review by committee to seek comments from the committee and support the direction of future work, and also provide the committee with information to determine if any additional areas should be added to the forward plan for further review. It does come with a caveat though, so however, agenda item 6, which is the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy. On this agenda, we will require a decision to be undertaken under delegation by Andrew Billany. Andrew, God, you've got the authority today, the Corporate Director for Housing and Community Safety Officer. So, Andrew, you are all powerful today, and you have extra authority because Graham Carr-Jones has given his apologies because he can't attend. So you're actually, in effect, almost Graham today, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So, Chair, before we crack on with the meeting, may I have move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies, please.
Chairman, we've not received any apologies for absence.
Fabulous. And I don't know why I called you Fiona, because you're not Fiona today. It's Lindsay today. Fiona's off on leave, isn't she? Declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations of interest? I know Councillor Batstone has one.
Chairman, I'm trying to
Pauline, you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
You're unmuted now, I can hear you.
That's okay. I declare an interest in the item on grants to voluntary bodies as I chair Dorset Race Equality Council, which has in the past benefited by grant aid from Dorset Council. Yeah,
and Councillor Holloway, go on then, Ryan.
Oh, sorry, Chairman, it's Lindsay.
Sorry.
Can I just cut in at that point? Can I just check what action will Councillor Batstone be taking when we get to the item, please, just for the minutes?
I should not be participating in the discussion. I shall be observing the meeting, but I shall not in any way participate.
Thank you.
If that's acceptable, or I can switch my camera off and wait to be summoned back in. But
I think that's perfectly okay. But in effect, it's not a financial interest for yourself, though.
It's not a personal financial interest. It's the organisation I chair.
Yeah, fine, okay. But you're currently receiving. Ryan, I'll tell you what, I'm loving the facial hair today. Do you know, I'm really jealous.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. I have to declare a similar interest with item 7 with the Dorset Grants because I am a trustee member for my local youth centre and it hasn't benefited from grants. So as of that, I will not take part in any participation on that agenda.
Yeah, Councillor James, I can imagine the same. Yeah. Is there anyone else in a similar position?
Yes, I am.
Yes, Chairman.
Yeah, Tony.
I'm chairman of the management committee of Verwood Youth Centre.
I'm a trustee of Dorchester Youth Centre.
Yeah, fine. Rebecca Knox.
Chairman, I think that probably all of us could probably say that we're associated with various bodies that receive grants from Dorset Council, because actually that's part of what we do for our community. So I'd like just to check with the democratic officer that indeed this does preclude us, because we don't directly receive any of that finance. I mean, I'm not sure that this precludes anyone from participating in the debate. I query that, Chairman.
Yeah. Do you know what, Rebecca? I think you're right. I think it's just a case of declaring it and not having to do it. Laura Cornett's on. Laura, do you have a view on this? Sorry.
Yes, I do actually, and I must admit I do agree with Rebecca, Councillor Knox, sorry, because this is about a process to ensure grants are administered fairly. It doesn't have any direct financial implication to any particular individual grants, and I think it's very honourable for the members to announce, and it's good to take that into account. However, this paper is purely about creating a fair process going forward. So I think actually the fact their experience within those community organisations is actually very valid within the debate for this.
Yeah, Laura, that's a really good point. And you know, I'm a trustee again of my youth centre, so I think it would be nice. Could someone, Lindsay, could you just double check with the Eagle what the legal advice is, if that's okay? Because we've got a bit of time yet, because it's towards the end of the agenda, so I think we should just get some clarification on that, and that'd be amazing. Fab. Right. Okay, so that's in hand. Are there any other declarations of interest that are not relating to the youth centres or the grants agenda item? Fabulous. Oh, here we go. Yeah, go on then, Beryl.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, I've only just got in. My Wi-Fi is playing up. Yes, I declare interest because of a grant for the youth club in the Purbeck Youth and Community Foundation as well. So I'm sorry I missed the conversation just now, but yes, I'm a trustee of that foundation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, all right then. So what we'll do is we'll wait for the legal Eagle to come back to us, and we'll get some clarification on that. So if there are no further RTSs, I'm gonna crack on, and we'll move on to the yeah, there we go. And Daryl's just mentioned in the chat we won't be core if we were deemed to have an interest. Yeah, that'll put us in quite a sticky situation. So public participation. So we have had a number of questions, however, they haven't been relevant to the committee, and so I won't be bringing them forwards just yet. So we'll leave that for the moment. But if we go on to questions from members, there's no questions from members. And then 5, agenda item 5, which is the impact of COVID on schools and youth provision, which is Councillor Andrew Parry. Andrew, would you like, and Vic, sorry, would you like to introduce yourselves, especially Vic, because I know that Vic is fairly new to Dorset Council.
Good morning, Councillor Andrew Parry, Cabinet Member responsible for children and education. Very happy that this paper is coming before your committee today, and thank you for giving it time to air. May I just say very briefly, it really does shine a light on how challenging the period has been since March 2020, and the challenges faced by our schools, by our families and our children and young people most of all. It does show in many ways how we have coped and how we have addressed things and how we've managed for education to continue not only to be delivered but in places thrive, and allowing children and young people that opportunity. But we also understand how challenging that has been for many. Remote learning has been difficult, and the return to the classroom environment has at times brought on issues around anxiety and concerns for our children and young people and their families. But I do hope that we have produced a report that will be of interest to your committee, and we do of course welcome any questions that you would like to put to us today. I know today we are joined on the call by Vic Verma, who has taken over from Mark Blackman in the educational role for us, whilst Mark is engaged at St Mary's and the Dorset Centre of Excellence, and Teresa Levy as the Executive Director for People / Children. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Okay, is Vic here, or have I made a mistake? And there you go.
Yes.
Hi, Vic. How are you?
Hi, nice to meet you. So as Councillor Parry said, I'm Vic Verma. I have been working with our Children's Services team over the last 13 or 14 months, and more recently, as Councillor Parry said, have taken on from Mark Blackman as Corporate Director for Education and Learning. Teresa is also with us, Teresa Levy. Teresa, I don't know if you wanted to say anything in terms of the paper before I give colleagues a brief overview.
Thank you, Vic, and good morning, colleagues, and morning, Chair. I don't want to add much to Andrew Parry's introduction, and Vic will then take you through the headlines of this report. I think it's absolutely a still live and with us moment, though. So just to kind of remind us that whilst we are all really looking forward to having this in the rearview mirror, that's not how our children and families in every way are experiencing that at the moment. And if I took some bold figures, which I think are true for us locally and certainly coming through in the research, there's something about a sort of 80-20 split, really. I think we can see that 80% of our children and families have had a difficult time, for sure, along with the rest of us. And have found that bumpy and lumpy, but I think 20% probably are going to continue to experience some really significant challenges as we go forward into this year and potentially into the future. So we're still in that process of looking at what does that mean for us as service deliverers to be able to support those families that need significant support to get to where they would have been, always wanting children to have those best outcomes that they can possibly achieve. So that's still work in progress for us. I'm really keen to hear and have the conversation with this committee about how we can really keep a tight focus on that and how we can shape and be agile in terms of what we do and what we deliver. We have been that throughout COVID. I am incredibly impressed with the staff that we have blessed with who have been able to respond and react. But Vic, I'll hand back to you for some kind of headlines on the themes in your report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Teresa. So I think as colleagues introduced, really, it is quite challenging to distill all of what happened over that 18 months and slightly longer into this report, but we'll try to give you a bit of a flavour of what occurred during that period, but also where we are now as an education system. So so over the period in particular that we're describing, there are 300 pieces of legislation and guidance and policy changes all wrapped up, which touched on all different parts of children's services and educational delivery. And quite often, as colleagues may be familiar, if you're governors or you were tracking some of that, that was quite close in proximity to when much of that had to be implemented. So that involved a significant task force from children's services to distill that and ensure that communications to our schools were absolutely clear and understood. And often there was some ambiguity and some interpretation that was required, which we were able to give leadership to. And really, as a community of professionals, you know, we can't think of a period when we've had to come together so quickly and mobilise as a unified force to support our children, and in particular our most vulnerable children. And that included colleagues from our Parent Carer Forum, from the police, from health, from our educational settings, from NHS health providers, fire and rescue, town and parish councils, and also our community and voluntary sector as well. So there were a number of partners who got together to really both interpret and deliver that guidance, but also continue to think about the emerging issues that were presenting at the time. I think it's fair to say Dorset Council took a very leading role as a system leader in all of that to coordinate the effort on the ground, in particular with schools, because whilst we have academies, foundation schools, free schools, and obviously our own maintained schools, the consistency was really that they are Dorset children, and we were supporting them holistically across the system, and with support from the Department for Education. And that also led to some innovation in terms of being able to share information very rapidly across partners to support that effort, and ensure that we were targeting support where it's needed. And there will have been points where we didn't completely get that right, but there were absolutely points where you know, we supported very well and wrapped around our children very rapidly, as did our schools. And as we kind of continue on, you know, we continue to listen. In fact, during the pandemic, we were in October 2020, we were part of the Ofsted National Research, which was timely in terms of, you know, speaking to us at the time when it was happening, but at the same time, you know, we were very mindful of feeding back to Ofsted that we are very much in the middle of the response, and we're not there yet. One of those innovations that we were able to feed into that Ofsted research was the School Attendance Tracker, one of the things we did very early on was bring together a network of our head teachers from across Dorset very quickly onto weekly calls, and we used our attendance tracker to ensure that we could monitor attendance of vulnerable children in particular, and that was based on the Department for Education definition of vulnerable children, but also we broadened that to allow our head teachers some flexibility to think about who else they felt were vulnerable. And through this period, I think something we've learned very rapidly is both the impact on siblings of children with SEN, for example, and children with learning difficulties, and actually we needed to wrap around them just as much as we did our other children, but also the number of children that became vulnerable as a result of the pandemic, and the additional support that meant that they wouldn't have been identified in a typical kind of category that a school would be identifying, but we were able to use our vulnerable children's tracker to monitor that attendance data and risk assess very carefully there, and that fed into the national Ofsted guidance, Ofsted report, sorry, in terms of their research, and was featured as as an area of best practice that we continue to monitor today. And that will, one of the things we're looking to develop that further is actually get access to live attendance information from our schools over the coming period. Moving on, one of the areas we found was obviously with home learning during that period, and in particular during the lockdowns, for non-key working children or children that weren't attending school during that time. Obviously, all parents were leaning into the classroom. The classroom was suddenly in the home, in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in places that we wouldn't have ever imagined. And parents were getting a very vital insight into the learning of their children, but also how teachers support those children and how difficult it can be without all of the mechanisms that a teacher has to engage children and young people. And one of the things we set up very early on was an educational psychologist helpline, and our educational psychologists have a range of tools that they often use and model to teachers to support differentiation in learning, typically in the classroom, but they were able to adapt that into methods that could be used at home to support families and email that out to families or send resources. And during that period, we had a number of telephone conversations with families to support challenges, both in terms of sometimes behaviour, sometimes in terms of engagement in learning, and that was very responsive to the needs that parents were presenting, and we learned a lot from that in terms of how we need to develop our practice around those periods. And obviously, when there were subsequent lockdowns, that was easy to mobilise as a support to our families very early on. But we noticed that a number of those calls were about the raised anxiety of children, that relationship with siblings and those fallouts, and often kind of the challenge of not being able to go to other places to spend time and being in the home, and obviously home learning for children with SEND was very variable. There were some children that found online learning very engaging and a very safe way to work, but actually for others they struggled with the attention levels on a screen for long periods of time, and that would have brought around challenges. And then in terms of risk assessments, there was a significant activity around risk assessing of our most vulnerable children and those that were shielding, and we did that jointly with our Parent Carer Forum to look at ways that we could risk assess and support in terms of the vulnerabilities for those attending school. So I think on the whole, that's a brief kind of canter through the last 18 months, and probably doesn't really do it justice in terms of all of that effort and activity that came from all of our agencies and our teaching workforce, all the way from early year settings up to colleges. A reminder that our schools were open, our early year settings were open, our colleges were open throughout that period, in particular for our key working families. And whilst at the time some of the headlines were about school closures, actually schools were very much open, and we experience what is quite a tired workforce at the moment, I think, who've gone above and beyond in terms of creating food packages for local community families and all sorts of activity where the school has reached out beyond its walls, really. And if I move on to youth clubs in Dorset aren't run by the local authority. They're typically community-led organisations, and during the lockdown, obviously, access to that youth provision was very challenging. Most will have closed, there was a limited reopening, but again, it would have been disjointed, and it wouldn't have been a particularly positive experience for those young people that would have wanted to access that type of provision. So some of the youth centres began to deliver detached youth work, so kind of reaching out to communities and trying to find other ways of delivering their engagement out in the field. And what we've done through our locality model in children's services and ensuring that we've got multi-agency approaches to supporting children and young people is recruited targeted youth workers who will work closely with those youth centres. And that's also supporting us in our contextual safeguarding work as well. So that's been a positive move. We've been able to use some very creative ways of achieving that, and youth centres have used buses and converted ice cream vans, as you'll see in the paper, to continue to deliver that support to young people. So as we move forward, we look towards the summer. Both youth centres will, we hope, open. There will be a significant amount of activity around the holiday and kind of summer activities where youth clubs will play a vital role, and part of that is funded from the government funding, taking on from last year's summer in Dorset activities, which were again picked up by Ofsted as a very leading piece of best practice, but wasn't funded by government at the time, but this year is, and we've been able to continue some of that work as we go on. So I think, Chair, probably to summarise, we don't fully know the impact. We're starting to see the trends, the anxiety. We know that the full impact of the pandemic on all of the lost learning time, all of the lost therapeutic time that some of our children receive, and just being amongst their peers and friends and environment has had a significant impact. We look, we begin to look forward as a children's services towards the summer period, but also to the autumn and what support our schools and children will need in that period. And there are a number of activities where honing in to support our schools and teachers. Yeah, certainly a very challenging period. We're very grateful to all of our teachers and our colleagues in the council for the support they've provided to children and young people. And I'll stop there for any questions.
Vic, thank you. It's quite amazing how much hard work has gone into the last 18 months or so. I think what we'll do is perhaps at the end, we'll see if we can, at the end of the agenda item, we'll see if we can do a formal thanks to our teachers and school staff that have worked over the pandemic. I know that this has probably created a lot of interest, and Vic, you mentioned that a lot of the youth provision is taken up by the community, and I think that there's a lot of members here that I know that are fully involved with youth work, so I'm sure that that the questions will come thick and thin, thick and fast. What we'll do now is, Rebecca, you were first, so I've got Rebecca Knox, I've got Tony Keames, and I've got Ryan Holloway.
Thanks, Chairman, and thank you, Vic, very much for that report. Very thorough. I'm sure there's a huge amount that could be in there, and I suppose my question is slightly related to that, and it's meant to be one that can just give us some assurance going forward. It's about performance indicators. You've mentioned a huge amount of items that affect young people, whatever age, within the report. But I was just wondering where your focus is going to be in the key performance indicators of how the work that you're putting into effect from now can assure us that the direction of travel is positive. I can see that, of course, we're starting at a level which is extremely unusual, but we need that, I suppose, forward thinking to assist you in policy development and process development to what actually is working and what will work and what is needed in the future, because it's going to be very different from the past. Could you? It's early stages, I know, but I'm sure there's some thinking going on in that direction.
Thank you, Councillor Knox. If I could just answer initially, and then Vic will take us down into the detail, I think, of the education issues that we're looking to. You're absolutely right. We've determined some very particular performance indicators that we're going to be tracking very tightly. We have a fantastic and yet fabulously large performance framework for children's services, because we are required to return a huge amount of statistical data to central government, so probably more than any other council departments. The danger with that is that we can get lost in that data in the many hundreds of performance indicators that we report on a monthly, quarterly and yearly basis. The ones that we think are going to be absolutely key for us, and they're very important in terms of our high needs block reduction strategy too, are around exclusions, fixed term or permanent, and we're wanting to wrap around our schools in that, and Vic will tell you a little bit more about how we're attempting to manage downwards the permanent exclusions across the county, because we all understand that if our children aren't in school, firstly they're not learning, but secondly they're massively at risk. So if we're looking at our safeguarding elements, having a child in school is the best way of safeguarding them, both from street risk and potentially from family pressure. So, you know, that is our determination, is that all children in school in Dorset, that's our first position. So Vic will talk to you a little bit more about how we're wrapping around that. We're also then very clear and very keenly aware that there have been some particular mental health challenges for our young people in the last few months, and we've seen a significant uptick in eating disorders, and that's reflected across the country. But that means that our young people with really complex needs have really risen in number. But we've also seen lower level, probably to the amount of about 20% increase in terms of that lower level emotional harm issue for our children and young people. And we're watching that and thinking very carefully with our health commissioners about how they can act with agility to get around that and wrapping around the schools. That's where we need that intervention to be going on. We did at the very outset, and in some ways the new locality model was well timed with COVID, if anything could have been, because that allowed us to allocate link workers to all of our schools, and it's had a really big impact upon that benefit. But that's an expensive resource for us. We are absolutely investing in that early intervention, and we're absolutely investing in those linkages to make sure that we get more help to families, but sooner. So absolutely, Councillor Knox, we want to engage with a university to really do a deep overview of our locality model and our investment in early intervention across the whole piece in the next few months. But maybe Vic will just say a little bit more about how we're going to be really tackling the inclusion agenda for our schools.
Thank you, Teresa. Yeah, I suppose if I can describe it in this way, that there are a number of things in education that are very countable and lend themselves to being measured in a very quantitative way, and exclusions data, attendance, tracking of children who are electively home educated, for example, and children with SEND. There are a number of indicators we can use, and we use on a weekly basis, which are live data sets that we can triangulate. I think the challenge we have and where we are moving towards, obviously, that early intervention activity, and much of that is working very well already, is the contextual work, the qualitative information that we learn from families. So a good example would be from the Educational Psychologist Helpline, which was set up. We learned a lot about our families and what was going on in the home, which didn't just touch the education activity, it touched all of our work as partners across. And I think, as I quite often say to my colleagues, really, you know, the education system that isn't limited to the school grounds, it actually goes beyond into the health, into social care, into police, and actually the triangulation of that information that each of the agencies hold is really key for us. So we're tracking a number of very measurable indicators. Attendance is absolutely key, because that quite often is a very helpful indicator of of engagement in learning, and is an indicator that we would work very closely with our education partners on. But exclusion, so in terms of measuring inclusion in schools, measuring exclusion is absolutely key, both in terms of fixed term exclusions, but also in permanent. And I'm working with a number of our head teachers where we see slightly higher numbers to understand what support we could be providing as a local authority to reduce that, to provide support from our educational psychologists, our specialist teachers, and to promote inclusion.
Well, thank you. That was
Thank
really
you.
exciting.
That's brilliant. And maybe, but through you, Chairman, I know we don't get performance figures as such at committees like this, but an outline at some stage in your forward plan would be really interesting to see the impact of where we can focus potential change or that pressure to keep on into the early intervention budget, which I know is always under a lot of stress. Thank you very much, Tim.
Rebecca, you are absolutely on fire today. That was a very good point, and thank you for your bringing that up. I think we will revisit this in a later time. We're going to go to Tony Coombs, then Ryan Holloway, and then Stella Jones and Pete Barrow.
My question's already been answered, Andrew.
Oh, fab.
Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, all right, there we go. See, Rebecca's a mind reader as well. Councillor Holloway, Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to really reiterate a little bit, obviously, first of all, thank you for the report, and obviously I thank all the amazing work that all our teachers and staff and the early years have done over this in precedent. This very obviously very strange times that we're in. Obviously, one of my real sort of questions really is, which not to try and repeat too much what Councillor Knox has already said, is that yeah, definitely as we progress with throughout this year, we definitely need to make sure we have long-term strategy plans, I think, for it, because the disruption is going to obviously take some time to obviously catch up with, because clearly we're not out of this pandemic yet, and obviously we don't know when it is going to be really officially over. So really all I would just say is that it's just making sure that, you know, that we monitor it, and I would welcome that we have this maybe come back to this committee again maybe later in the year, but really we need to just make sure that we keep long-term strategy plans, I think, for this, because I think this is going to be key to sort of help our young children and our young people get back on their feet and thrive. Thank you.
Okay, fab. Thank you, Ryan. Stella.
Yes, first of all, it's great that all the staff in all the schools and establishments carried on working so hard to keep our children educated. But can I mention early years? The early years settings were open throughout the most of the COVID time, but some of them have problems with finances, because unless parents paid for extra sessions besides the sessions that are paid for by the government, they lost money. And I wondered if we're helping them financially, the ones that are actually struggling, to continue. And then I'll do another question after that one's answered, if you like.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jones. So we are very blessed by having our head for early years, Liz Curtis-Jones, who has been doing an incredible piece of work around sustainability and sufficiency. We have a responsibility as a local authority to ensure there is sufficient early years provision. And you're absolutely right, in this time, and who again, we are still attempting to forecast what family attitudes and approaches to early years care will be, and nationally you'll have seen that a lot of provision is feeling the pinch of families not needing or wanting to use as much early cares provision as they used to, so a real challenge around for those providers. We've done everything within our possible power to both support those that were at risk of not being able to survive, because we wanted them to survive where that was their intention. So we've really supported them with their grant applications and with seeking any support that was available around COVID matters. But we're also looking with them about wanting to make sure that the provision is all good and outstanding. We're very blessed with good and outstanding provision presently, but also thinking about what the capacity is for that provision to be able to support children with additional needs. So we have a SEND relook too around how our early years provision may be able to wrap around children with additional needs. So it's absolutely on our radar. I have to say, sufficiency of offer from the market to our children at all levels have been a concern during this time. We know it's quite expensive to run provision within Dorset. It's an expensive area around property, and there are challenges around capacity for staffing. So we're very much aware of wanting to really support our early years provision and being successful, but also needing still to see quite how it will be for families when they're back in the office, back in the workplace, out of out of some of the furlough situations. We're absolutely still, for the next quarter or two, in an area of attempting to forecast in a bit of a fog.
Thank you.
Sorry,
if I may just add to the very worthy point that Stella's put forward there. You know, just one example of where we saw a pressure on our early years was when it came around to the census numbers, the numbers of returns for the year, and how they were going to manage the challenge of that. And okay, solutions were found, and I do understand that. But one of the things that a lot of early years provided, and throughout the education settings that we saw, was that we talked about the number of pieces of guidance and legislation that were issued, and we put a figure on that in the region of 300. But it's also important to note that a lot of that arrived at the 11th hour in many cases and had to be implemented very, very quickly. And that caused further pressures in the system, which, you know, hats off to everybody who got it sorted, but we should not for any moment underestimate the challenge that was in having to change tack sometimes at very little notice.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Perry. I know that there was an example that you were giving, perhaps I think over the summer, where the legislation literally changed within 2 days. And I think you were up all night, and I think poor Teresa, yeah.
I'm only 25, really.
Had a very hard paper round over the last few months.
Right, no.
Can I? We'll crack on. That's again.
Can I go to my second point now?
Yes, you may.
Now, in August, I think we're going to have a problem. What support are we going to give to students and teachers when the GCSE and A-level results come out? Because there are obviously going to be disputes again, because it's not been based on exams.
So,
or Teresa.
Yeah, I'll come to Vic in a moment, but you know, absolutely, as if our schools haven't always had to find a new way. This is another new way, and we do know that actually a number of children are feeling you know, significantly frustrated by not having been able to take their exams. Now, yeah, there's a kind of mythology that kids never wanted to do that sort of stuff. Actually, what this whole period has told us is they absolutely do. They absolutely want to have their moment to be able to say, this is evidence of my work and this is how things have been. There will be some disputes, there absolutely will, and our schools will all have processes to deal with that. We're not going off for the summer, believe you me. We'll be there alongside our schools, and we'll have our support teams working alongside them too. So we'll manage that with them, and they'll manage it in terms of their own individual processes. The schools would have been talking with you. You're still meeting with them on a weekly basis. I mean, we've still got a fantastic ongoing relationship. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yes, so we continue to meet with our schools on a weekly basis. So in fact, that was this morning just before I joined this meeting. In fact, and next week will be our last one before they take a well-earned break. But yes, they have been undertaking those teacher-led assessments. It's been a significant activity over the last couple of months, and also the moderation process. I think, as I said, really, you know, we communicate very well with our schools. We have very regular communications. Exams is one area that we continue to discuss with them, but there are many others, and obviously I believe there will be some further announcements today in terms of the relaxation of some of the COVID restrictions and how that might impact on schools. So we wrap all of these things up in a regular weekly discussion with cluster leads who represent our schools and cascade that information out. And you know, I speak with our head teachers daily, to be honest, and they, you know, they'll always raise those kind of concerns and where they need our support. And you know, really, I think we'll just continue, as Teresa said, we'll be here for the summer. Our team will be here for the summer, and we'll watch this space when the results are announced, and be responsive to that with our heads.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. That's brilliant. My meeting chat's gone. Hold on. Sorry, team. It's Pete Barrow, and then we've got Councillor Turner and Beryl, and then followed by Carol Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. As a school governor of the local primary, and also somebody who, with my wife, homeschooled a 6-year-old grandchild for 8 weeks, I've sort of been on the front end of some of this, and I've been hugely impressed about the way the schools have gone about dealing with this. So, like everybody's been very thankful for what the schools have done, but to see it from the inside as well, it really is very impressive, and our thanks must go to them. My question really follows on from what Rebecca said, that see, Vic's report is fantastic, full of information, but it's difficult because it lacks the KPIs. It's difficult to know what the impact of all of that brilliant work is actually having. And it's been mentioned that we're going to have some KPIs around exclusions and mental health issues around support for children with SEND. But what about how are we going to gauge the actual effect that all of this has had on the children's learning? How are we going to understand what impact has been and what needs to be done to actually try and get the children back to where they were if this hadn't happened? Thank you.
Happy to take that question. I think that we start to tread into the realms of the more qualitative assessments that we're making and our teachers are making on a daily basis when they are supporting children in the classroom. There are two areas of new policy that we're kind of implementing within our education service. So the first is around revamping what we describe as our outreach in reach service, which is where we will bring together our specialist teaching professionals to work with our schools on whole school approaches to early identify and give them tools to support early in terms of particular learning difficulties. The second is we will be developing a new, what we will describe as kind of professional advice line for head teachers, governors, parents alike, building on the good work of the educational psychologists during the pandemic, and again giving us that intelligence. And we'll be able to use that information in a qualitative way, but also in a measurable way to inform our work alongside all of the other measuring that we do. And I think I wouldn't want you to get the impression that we don't have a large swathe of data on our educational settings, because we do. We track that very carefully in terms of exclusions, SEND, and in a number of other areas. So whilst we have those performance indicators, it's gaining that intelligence early of what's happening in our schools. Weekly conversations with head teachers are really helping us pick up themes around anxiety, which is why we'll be coming out over the summer with what we'll be describing as kind of a strong start in September. So tools for families and tools for teachers to be using to reduce anxiety, ready for the autumn and the start of the new academic year, because we hope that the next academic year will be a full one and there won't be any further school closures. And beyond that, we continue to meet with our regional schools commissioner from the Department for Education. We meet with them, I meet with them on a weekly basis, and then we have a wider meeting on a regular basis as well, again to track those trends across the Southwest and work we could be doing with our neighbouring authorities as well. So.
Chair, if I might just add, please, Councillor Power, thank you very much for the opportunity to remind us really that we are, however, not coming from an only strong base across our school outcomes for our children. So not all of our schools are good or outstanding at the present time, and they all want to be, and we're absolutely supporting them in getting there and working with the Regional Schools Commissioner to make sure that's the case, whether they're academies or maintained. But we also know that the deprivation gap for our vulnerable children isn't where we want it to be. Too many of our children who are not school ready go on to have too poor outcomes in their educational outcomes at 16. So we absolutely have a good education for all approach, and we will continue to do that. And part of this week's conference around inclusion, excuse me, is to do that too, because we're not where we wanted to be at the beginning of COVID. You know, at the very beginning of this, not all of our children, many children across Dorset are having the very best life, and it really is a fantastic place to be a child. But if you have a vulnerability, if you are a family from a child from a poor family, or you have SEN support needs, or you're a young carer, if you meet any of those vulnerability categories, your educational outcomes are not where they should be for a county like us. So we're incredibly focused on that. We're having that conversation at all times with our schools and with the DFE and with Ofsted. So that's the journey we have to go on. To have a steady state, as we have managed to create in this time, has been exceptional, really. We now need to power up and get to a point where all of our children, particularly those with vulnerabilities, are having improved outcomes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Teresa. It was very concise. Councillor Turner, so Daryl, and then followed by Beryl.
Thank you. Is it me?
No, it's Daryl, followed by Beryl.
Oh, Daryl, sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, Beryl, we sound very similar.
You do. You've got a slightly more masculine voice, though.
My question has been touched on in some places, I think, but I'm just concerned about the children who have now left school, who have been impacted on this. Now, you've talked about future discussions with headmasters, with parents, but are we setting anything up for the children who have left the system, who have been impacted? I mean, my son has left the Woodruff School this year. He's finished. I think the COVID has impacted on him a fair bit. And I want to know if there's any support for the children directly. Thanks.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you. Really helpful. That probably is the group that I'm most concerned about. I think it's the group that probably feels they've missed out the most, and that they're feeling somewhat at sea at the moment in terms of where they can go, what they can do, whether they would have been young people who would have been travelling, or they would have been having a variety of work opportunities that aren't quite available to them yet. What we're looking to do is to make sure that our service that looks at children who are at risk of being out of education, training and employment is really picking up those young people, making sure that we know where their destinations are, if they're going on to further learning, and if they're not, that they're taking up those opportunities around employment and training. And as a council, one of the things that we're really looking to ensure is that we continue to drive up our level of apprenticeships locally. So we've got a good number into the hundreds presently already, and Matt Prosser and I were just discussing the other day that we could step that up even further around that apprenticeship offer, so that we're at least at 5% of our workforce, and therefore really maxing out on the requirements of the opportunity for us to put that funding into that apprenticeship offer. We need to see that across the whole county. We need to see that work opportunities for all, for particularly again those young people with SEND, so that they have a good and settled adulthood, but for all of our young people. I'm also keen that we encourage a national conversation about those young people. This summer they will come back out onto the streets. They'll be out around and amongst us, and I don't want them just to be experienced because they're in groups as being a challenge, but of course with the level of anxiety understandably that's in the community, that could happen. So around making sure that we've got a sense of community for them. Some of that summer in Dorset, year 2 is part of that, making sure that we've got some offer for opportunities and activities for our young people. But I think fundamentally this is a summer for us all to step in and wrap around those young people, welcome them with a smile, making sure that we're not seeing them as antisocial because they're gathering and they're outside and being noisy, because I think they will be. And then as we go back into the autumn, as Vic says, we're having a very strong conversation with our schools about a really good September start, hoping that those that can come back well and can play catch up, because it will be a degree of catch up. Clearly we're looking for that leadership too from the Department of Education, and hoping to see some opportunities coming forward for those young people. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you, Teresa.
Welcome.
Beryl.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm here now. Sorry, Daryl and Beryl sound similar to me. Yeah, I wanted to thank Teresa and hello, Vic. I've not met you before, and very welcome. Yeah, the youth provision over the last 16 months, actually in the Wareham area, has been working in partnership, the youth centre there with Dorset Council, and lots of partnerships around this area, because we are a bit of a hub for most of Purbeck, and actually we do welcome the seminar on the summer activities programme again. It was very much enjoyed last year and very well received by the young people, and meeting up their friends, and I took part in some of that, so I could see the joy that was enjoyed there. Certainly all the activities outside, using Kerry Camp and Leeson House and things like that, are really useful for them as well. So they're not only just enjoying themselves, but they're learning as well. and with all the activities. Yeah, the Wareham Youth Centre has actually been running the whole of the time, and they've been, you know, a hub of activities really for vulnerable families and difficult and disturbed children in the area. And so it's been really quite a haven for you know, families to have a bit of relief and respite with the one-to-one working and the walk and talk that's happened, and we work very much in partnerships with Dorset Council on this, and having the new locality youth workers has been really useful. The one for our area has been really integrated very well. Yeah, I'm sad to say she's actually on maternity leave at the moment, I believe, so you know, we're hoping that someone else will step in. But we worked in with the Citizen Advice and lots of local voluntary organisations as well. And it's amazing how the communities come together to actually help with things. And the Helping Kindness groups and all the other, you know, doctor surgeries and everything else. Everybody has worked so well together. And of course, the vaccination programme as well around the Wareham area has worked very, very well at the Wareham Hospital. And it's certainly for some families, the impact of COVID has been right devastating, and it's been very an anxious and a stressed time over the 16 months. But some of the families have been very, very grateful for Dorset Council, as with, you know, some of the youth provision that we've been able to put in, and we've worked really hard to try and have outside activities and work with the local schools as well. So, and we're ongoing with that, and that's actually given us a new really good grounding for the future, and we hope that will continue. And thank you, Teresa, Andrew and Vic and everybody involved. It's really been very good to see people step up. Of course, we wouldn't have wanted this COVID thing, would we? But it does show that people do that extra 10% when needed to help difficult and vulnerable families, and thank you very much. And our team at the youth centre have been marvellous, so I thank them very much as well. Thank you for this. Thank you. Bye bye.
Chairman, if I may give a response, and obviously Beryl,
brief one.
Kind words. I think one of the things I take away from that, and I speak as somebody who has some very fond childhood memories myself of time in the Purbeck over the summers, is how important Purbeck is as an area, not just in respect of the children who live in the locality, but as an area of destination for children and young people to come to learn those interactions of skills of play and enjoyment and knowledge and education in those wonderful settings. You mentioned Leeson House, Carey Camp. I do know, I think everybody's wishing that the weather's a little kinder for Carey Camp this year than it might have been last summer, but I do know everybody had a fabulous time anyway, and our very best wishes. I do hope I will receive an invitation to come and visit it myself.
Fab. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Beryl.
Pass that on, Andrew. I'll pass it on to Paul.
Thank you, Beryl. It's always lovely to hear about Youth Centre. Okay, yeah, Vic,
just one further point as well, which I didn't mention in the paper, so apologies. 24 of our schools in Dorset are running the summer schools programme. Two, I think, Purbeck School and Swanage School in particular in those areas. So, and we're very grateful to those schools for bringing back their teaching staff to kind of, back to support with the summer schools. It's not easy. A number of schools have really struggled to set up summer schools, particularly for that reason. And I think we're very grateful for the schools that have been able to open their doors and their grounds to children and young people over the summer. So just to let you know, and I have the list of the 24 which we'll make available, but there continues to be activities available. And there's a fairly good spread across Dorset, I feel. We could always do more, but a very good spread, of summer schools that will be opening. So I'm happy to share that with the committee after.
Fab. Okay. All right. I'm going to go to Paul. Sorry, not to Pauline. To Carol Jones. Carol.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me speak to this committee. At a governor's meeting at the end of last week, we had a very full safeguarding report, and it was just sobering to say the least. It included a disturbingly high number of attempted suicides. What I got back was that some of the outside services that one can access had raised the bar, making them non-accessible for some students, and I wondered whether we could actually look into that. And I wonder also whether there's any way we can map out to see, whilst I understand that this is across the board, are there some areas which are having more problems than others? And if there are, then can we find a way to find a resource on a temporary period just to help those safeguarding teams manage? It's just such an issue. And finally, the targeted youth workers have been absolutely brilliant, I understand, but are they going to be working over the summer holidays? Because I rather fear they're not, and I'm just really worried about what's going to happen over the summer holidays, certainly in the area that I am, but obviously others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And I can clarify. In fact, I was just about to send you an email. I can clarify the particular issue that you raised with me about your own particular youth worker has about 3 days off at the beginning of August. Apart from that, is working throughout the whole of the summer.
As an emergency measure that we do.
Oh, Tony's got a microphone on. Thank you. There we go.
Great, thank you. But generally they are a scarce resource. They're a really valued resource, as you say, and it's been lovely to hear them celebrated on this committee today. We want to see and do more of that. That's why we're really absolutely coordinating the summer in Dorset. The issue that you're raising about, you know, have some mental health services raised the bar? My understanding is factually not, but whether that's how it's been experienced by people is always, of course, a different matter. Have they experienced a significant amount of pressure? I think yes, they absolutely have. The issues that you raise, I know this committee will appreciate why one must be cautious about discussing self-harm, attempted suicide and suicide, because of how those discussions must be managed very thoughtfully, particularly around young people. There's some really good evidence from the Bridge End experience about how we manage that. But it is the case that we are seeing significant increases in our request for service around some of those matters. We are responding absolutely with both our early help and our social work services. At the present time, because of the investment we've been able to make within frontline staff as part of Blueprint in terms of moving services much more to the frontline, we are in a place where we have caseloads that I think are more manageable than they've ever been before. That's really important to us. Keep a very tight eye on that. There is little point in our staff, family workers or social workers, having more families than they can meaningfully work with. So we're keeping a very close eye on that. Clearly, the other really important issue for us is to have good, trained, supported, happy, permanent staff in all of those posts. By November, with our wonderful pipeline of our trainees coming back to the workplace through the summer from completing their, no doubt, difficult training years as well, we will only have, if all things remain the same, and they probably don't generally in life, but by November we'll only have 2 social work vacancies across the whole council for children's services. That's unheard of, I have to say, and as a result we've been asked by DFE to have a conversation with them about how you manage workforce, which is helpful, and we'll have that conversation. But they are still experiencing the level of complexity is an increased position. So for sure, families where they may have been medium previously, we're seeing that at a much higher level. And that clearly is a tired workforce who have remained stood up, doing social work and family work in people's front gardens when we weren't allowed to go in their houses, doing the walk and talk that I just heard Belle describe, which is such an important thing. Our PAs for our care leavers constantly being on the beaches, as some of you'll see if you're on social media, constantly being in the woods walking with our care leavers. So we've got a constant service going out to families, going out to all of our vulnerable people who are referred to us, but it's a pressure point for us at the moment. There is no doubt about it. We're at the end of Q1 of what we'd all like to think is our out of COVID year, but we're not out of it. We're seeing Q2 will be a really challenging year for us in terms of the demand and the requirement. I'm trying to balance, as you'll all appreciate, giving my workforce time back, because they really, it was the early help workforce that stepped into undertaking all of those shielding interviews 7 days a week from the very outset. It's been really important to give some of that back to staff, but also keeping a really strong and robust offer available throughout August. So please do let me know if you're hearing things that aren't getting the support they need, because we want to get the support at the right time as quickly as we possibly can. So I really welcome that feedback. But I'm also just balancing a workforce that needs to be having some time back, as our schools are too.
Fabulous, thank you, Teresa. I'm going to on a button now because it's time to ask some questions after as the committee have finished. I think for me, I'm concerned about our children that aren't in education at the moment. So, and I think that the number is probably quite underrepresented. So, I think, you know, for me, it's like a case of, well, what agreements do we have in place with other partner agencies to increase our knowledge of our children, sort of either not in education or in some sort of elective education, and what internal processes do we have for being able to find those families? And also, I couldn't find this online, but does Dorset have a voluntary register of elective learning? Sorry, that's 3 there. Oh, Vic, there you go.
So we do have a register of children electively home educated and missing education, and I think on the forward plan for this committee we are proposing to bring a report on that particular area of policy for the 2nd of September meeting, to cover what we've described as children missing education, missing out on education, elective home educated, and then not in education, employment and training. So lots of acronyms there to get through, but we'll bring forward a paper with our data and our kind of the plans that are in place around supporting those children and young people, in particular from the next academic year, but all the work that's been done this academic year already.
Yeah, thank you, Vic. I think it's just left on me now just to give the formal thanks to all the individuals involved in supporting our young people and children, all the way up from birth to adulthood and sort of to 25 really. I know that it's been incredibly difficult. I think we've all to an extent been involved running activities or giving up our time to go in the classroom, and I know that the teachers have gone above and beyond, but also the threat of COVID must have been incredibly worrying, especially at the very beginning. So I think we've got to pass our thanks to them. So hopefully members will join me in doing that. I think for me that the one last question is around the funding, and I suppose actually, to be honest, I'm going to be naughty and I'm going to do something that I hate, and I'm just going to say that this isn't a question. It's more of a statement, and it frustrates me that there is very little funding that's come with this, and it just seems like the people that have been affected most by our lockdown and sacrificed the most, our young people and our children, have had the least amount of funding come through. And I'm not saying that's from Dorset Council. I'm saying I think that's a national issue, and I think that we really need to raise that to say, actually, it's our reception age children that have had a bizarre 18 months, and it's our 16-year-olds that haven't been able to do their GCSEs, and that everything they've worked towards has just been destroyed in just a matter of months. It's those people that need our support, and I think we really need to push to our MPs and our government and say, look, do you know what, these people need more love, and let's do that. But yeah, that's my little high horse. All right, okay, and on that one, we'll crack on. Thankfully, the legal has joined us. Jonathan Mayer, could you just conclude? We're just going to crack on now and just mention the dispensation for the agenda item on grants. Jonathan, are you happy if you just come in and just clarify the council's position and our position?
Yeah, good morning, councillors. I'm Jonathan Mayer, Monitoring Officer. So you've got an item on your agenda this morning about the grants protocol, and I understand that some of you are concerned about whether you need to declare an interest in relation to that because of your work with either voluntary groups or charities. I know that as councillors, you're all engaged in your communities, you're all actively involved in charities and various groups, youth centres, all sorts of things. What the Councillor Code of Conduct requires is that you have to make a disclosure of something if it arises at a meeting and it affects your finances or the finances or well-being of a charity or group that you're involved in, that you work with. And the test that we have to apply is, would it affect the finances of that body more than it affects the finances of the majority of other such bodies in the council's area? And then would a member of the public, knowing all the facts, think that because of that, because of your involvement in that charity or group, it's affected your judgment of the public interest? That would be really important where you were dealing with, where you were considering an item at your meeting about an individual charity or voluntary group, but you're not doing that this morning. What you're looking at is the process and this, that the council is going to follow, and what sort of information is expected when an organisation makes an application for a grant. That will apply to all bodies, the ones that you're involved in and other ones, so that I do not believe that there is anything for councillors to declare this morning.
Jonathan, you are amazing as always. Thank you. That's fantastic advice. That means that we can actually all partake in it. So thank you. And thank you for giving up your morning.
Yeah, that's fine. So Chairman, yeah, all councillors can participate fully in this. No need to individually declare membership of charities or voluntary groups. No reason for anyone on this occasion to step out of decision making. Thank you.
Cheers, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Keep safe. Okay, I think the guidance on that's clear. We can crack on now. Which anyway, so we'll crack on to agenda item 6, which is the Dorset Council Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy. Graham Carr-Jones is away at the moment, so Andrew Bellany as a corporate director to introduce, and supported by Sharon Atwater and Fiona Brown. So Andrew, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. As introduced, I'm Andrew Bellany. I'm the Corporate Director for Housing and Community Safety. So I don't intend to talk for long around introducing the report, because it's already a long and detailed report, and many members on this call have already been involved very helpfully in working groups and previous discussions at overview. But as Andrew has just said, because there's lots of work gone into this particular document, and we're at the stage where we want to take forward this paper to Cabinet in the end of July. The detail that's changed since we last spoke is very much around the action plan. What are we going to do about it? What are we proposing to do about it? So Sharon Atwater, who's done a large chunk of the work around pulling this strategy together, is on the call, and Fiona Brown, who leads our homelessness service, is also on the call as well. So we can more than very interested to open up conversation around the detail within what we intend to do around the strategy, because that's the bit that's moved on since we last spoke. It's worth setting just a brief bit of context. Many of you will know, but the world of homelessness and rough sleeping is constantly demanding. It shifts a lot over the period of time with new strategies, new policies from government. For example, we were written to only last week from the Minister around pushing strongly on the government's intention to basically move away, have no rough sleepers nationally, and we are very much driven to develop strategies which will resolve the people sleeping rough in this area. That said, the particular context of homelessness is important, because we've got to recognise a good 80% of the people we are working with who are homeless or in danger of homelessness are not from a rough sleeping origin. So that could be from being evicted from their homes, it could be for other forms of vulnerability, perhaps mental health. So perhaps in the detail within the report about how we would resolve set up a strategy which will deal with that area of demand too. So rough sleeping is important, but that's not the whole picture. So context is there. What I'd want to pull out of this particular report, again, it's what has changed since we're discussing this issue. You'll recall, many of you will recall, there's a series of workshops involving many of you councillors on the call at this meeting during the early parts of the year, which took us to public consultation, which was carried out between March and May of this year, where we took the strategy and the proposals out to the public. There's lots of detail in the report around the response to that that consultation, but I'll perhaps pull out some key sort of common observations, if you like, about what people have most commonly said. Probably predictably, perhaps, lots of people have made the comment: build more homes, provide more funding, which we operate within that. Clearly, that's our intention, but we have to develop plans that are realistic and deliverable. But the other strong theme, which I think would be perhaps of interest to this committee, is lots of comments around making sure there's better links with health and the health and well-being agenda, particularly with the various agencies and authorities which work in that field. So we've looked to address those comments in the action plan, and it also reflects other priorities and other work within the wider system. Certainly the health authority, who are looking to address particular health needs of the homeless community. So that's it's worth highlighting that in particular, and can maybe come back to that through questions. Before I throw it out open to discussion, though, I think I'd draw attention also to the action plan that we've set in place. We think it's realistic and deliverable, but it is worth setting the context of us having to push quite hard with getting access to government funding streams, making sure we're bidding on a regular basis to make sure we're adequately resourced. That's underway, and that we set a plan that is deliverable, so we can, for example, move away from having to use emergency accommodation in bed and breakfast accommodation, and to be able to move into a position where people are prevented from being in that position in the first place, but also that some solutions are provided which are better than that. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, and then open up to any questions or comments or steers we have from members.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I tell you what's lovely is that this is almost like our little baby. You know, we've worked on it from an embryonic stage. We've had the workshops. It's come to us, and I think, you know, it's getting there, and it's a really lovely document, and I'm quite happy with it. There's a few things I'd like to sort of highlight, but we'll come on to that in a bit. At the moment I've got Councillor Tony Alford. Tony.
Yes, good morning, and thank you. When it comes to a strategy document, I am someone that is fairly easy to please, and the reason for that is that I sort of understand a strategy document as developed from three essential components, one of which is a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, then key objectives, and then the plans and policies to deliver those objectives. So I really had encouragement with this paper when I got to page 53 and saw the heading Objective Number 1. And this section runs through to about page 77 with Objective Number 5, I think it is. So what I really want to say is that is the section of the document that I find most useful. I have a suspicion that it is Appendix 2, a final action plan, that's its genuine title, but it seems to me that is where the information that really matters, the monitoring in the future needs to happen. And what I'd just like to say is undoubtedly we will thank all of those who've been writers and contributors to the whole document, but I would particularly like to thank those who've contributed to Appendix 2.
Andrew, do you want to come back to that?
Thank you, Councillor, for that. Thank you for your comments. It just struck me there probably is two people that I've missed out from this, but we brought in external advice from national experts in the field, Neil Morland and Amber Christou. I think it's just worth giving some credit for them publicly around their work to bring us to the stage we're at. But I would stress also on the work, Councillor Alford's point about the work in this. I think we've worked since then on making this fit for Dorset, making sure we apply the good practice that goes on around the country, and apply a strategy which fits our own local needs for the area that we operate within. Because clearly we have varied needs from Weymouth and the concentration of rough sleepers through to a rural homelessness, which is a significant pressure. If you're without a home in a village with little available to let, then that's a significant pressure in itself. So we're developing a strategy which looks to fit all of our various needs.
Yeah, fab. It's all good. Stella Jones.
Yeah, the report is very good, and our aim to cut down on homelessness is excellent. But when you read through the report, the reason for homelessness is the lack of affordable and social housing. It says on page 127 that Dorset house prices in Dorset is 10.6 times the average salary to buy the medium house in Dorset, which is obviously unaffordable for a great many people. And then on page 155 it says Dorset has 12% social rented housing, which is 30% lower than the rest of England. So until we start building affordable houses and social housing, we're going to continue having this homelessness problem. We really must start actually creating more homes for people.
Would you like me to respond, Andrew? Yeah. I mean, thank you for that. I mean, I think another strand of our area of work is to make sure we do provide a stream of new affordable homes and make best use of the affordable homes we have available. So, you know, working with the housing association providers, so we make sure we get the proportion of their relets that we do, so we can house people who are previously homeless. Certainly, that drive to provide more affordable homes is understood. Last year we provided 300, just 301 actually, from the housing association providers, which all helps. But as you'll recognise from the statistics, there's still a mismatch with the people we have in temporary accommodation and on the housing register. Those numbers do help, but there still is a gap. Absolutely right, Councillor Jones.
Now, when you look at the housing register, you've got 2,000 on over 2,000 on silver, over 2,000 on bronze. We probably won't get a chance at all because you've still got over 800 on the gold register waiting for housing. We really just have got to build more housing.
What I would say maybe is a flag for future work, ideally through this committee. We're developing further work on a housing strategy for Dorset as well, which is looking to making sure we're striking the right balance around the provision of new housing, but also what we do with our existing. Because clearly there doesn't need to. We need housing in all its forms, but it needs to be balanced with other constraining factors. So that's something we certainly will be coming back for further discussion. How do we provide what we need, but how do we make sure it balances with the rest of our policies across the council?
I think that's a really good point, and I'm going to be cheeky here because usually I leave my questions to the end, but actually it comes into one of my questions. I think the document's great, but I think one of the areas that we do need to do a bit of work on is around our work links to the local plan. You touched on it, Andrew, but I think actually the issue is that, you know, do we have the right type of accommodation? Is it in the right place? And I don't think we've really done that from the document, and I think that's where we really need to highlight. And if we're going to take anything through from today, I think it would be that push there.
Thank you, and that's helpful.
Yeah. Don't know if anyone else. Does anyone else have any comments regarding Stella and my points? Otherwise, we'll crack on with the question.
Yes, I do, Chair, if you don't mind.
I thought you might, Pete. You're the sort of guy that'll come in something like that. Pete, go for it.
There's only one quick point. The COVID pandemic has obviously led to a lot of people no longer wanting to live in the cities or work in the cities. And just locally, we've noticed quite an increase in house prices as demand for housing in the area has gone up. So the question is, have we sort of any idea of the impact that the rise in house prices as a result of this is going to have on our homelessness situation?
It's a very good question, because it's worrying us. I mean, there's prices are, as you're correct in what you're saying, the prices are rising in Dorset, and partly to do with that the demand from elsewhere. It's affecting our ability to acquire the right type of temporary accommodation, also to make sure we're giving a roof over people's heads who are homeless. So it's an issue for us, and we're already finding it hitting us in terms of just affordability of finding alternative accommodation, and also the rental market is looking to that and recognising it can attract renters from other parts of the country as well as homeowners. So probably too early to give you exact figures on how that's affecting homelessness pressure, because at the moment we're finding that most of our approaches are linked to the eviction ban being lifted, because most of you will realise the government have protected tenants during the pandemic from being evicted from their homes, but that's been lifted, and now that landlords can regain possession of their homes, so that we are being approached by tenants in that position, and we expect that to be a spike in homelessness demand coming as courts start to process those eviction requests. So we're keeping a close eye on the market, and whether that puts additional pressure on homelessness. We think it probably will, but I'd say for the moment the biggest pressure on us is the affordability of the housing that's out there for us to use to prevent homelessness in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good point, Pete. There you go. It's all these groggles coming down from London. I'm looking at Andrew Bellany there. Yeah, it's a difficult one, Andrew, isn't it? And it's not straightforward at all. But I think it's worth noting. I think Pete's raised a really good point, that there is that added demand as a result of COVID, and I think that should be reflected. I'm going to go back to actually our chat now, because I've got Molly, I've got Daryl, we've done Peter, and then I've got Rebecca. So Molly.
Thank you very much. Well said, Stella. Also, can I just say as well, thank you for the opportunity to be involved with the working group. It's been really useful and very interesting, and it is great to see the strategy come this far and be then presented to council, because it's been a long time coming and a lot of hard work. And it brought home to so many of us, so many people who are actually working in this field as our partners, and the good work that they are doing, because there is no point in giving somebody a front door and a key without the support work that's needed to take people to that place, and then to help to sustain the tenancies. And there has been an amazing amount of work done around this. I wanted to also say, because we thought that the new burdens funding, the domestic abuse funding, would be really useful in helping with this. And I'm afraid to say, for those sitting around this table who thought, oh, well, this is great, we can use this to support the people who are moving out of refuge and varying things. It isn't quite like that. The new burdens funding is accommodation-based support. And as many of you know, we have a lot of refuge space and safe home space within our area. But Graham Carr-Jones and Andy Frost and myself and Andrew have been working hard to try to find opportunities to widen the scope of that. I have found people say things to me like, well, do you know, instead of saying they're pregnant, they say they're suffering DA and they come down here and take our houses. Again, I want to reassure people there is a very informed discussion that goes on before anybody's allowed to take those precious spaces and then become maybe a housing need for us as a council. The decision has to be very informed about if it's very necessary. Julian House have also taken on a worker to support victims of domestic abuse who are living rough and homeless. and she has spoken about how many of the client group that are within the services are these people. And again, that's very innovative that we've done that and looked at ways of doing this. The COVID, the regulations brought new rules around us, and we had to house perpetrators who were moved out of accommodation. So that's sort of given a lot more that we've had to take account of. And I personally, as the DA champion, would just like to thank the whole housing team and everybody involved in the support of this as well. And I think that we've got a fabulous way forward now. Thank you. I'm done.
Thanks, Molly. Andrew, do you want to comment?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I'm doing all the talking. Probably Fiona could come in on the resettlement, on the Julian House worker, because that is a good example of some of the individual pieces of activity we do to try to resolve particular needs. I mean, that worker works very well with people with very acute homelessness needs. Fiona, do you want to explain a bit more about what that does?
Yeah, that role was, you'll probably be aware that over a period of time the council's benefited from the Rough Sleeper initiative funding, and that role was something that we started utilising as we received some more money, also very short-term money from the government, for I think it was about 3 months of the last financial year, so the last quarter. We got some funding to set up that post. It was initially meant to be short-term. Although Molly refers to the particular link with women who are rough sleeping who have been the victims of domestic abuse.
And men, Fiona.
Sorry, and men. But it started being originally a female worker. The role now with the Rough Sleeper Initiative funding has extended. They're now part of the Navigator service that operates through Julian House. It's funded, as I said, by the Rough Sleeper Initiative Fund. And it is also to help particularly women who women who are rough sleepers have probably higher and more complex needs than men, because often men are able to sustain accommodation, sometimes for longer. But the outcome is that we've got this role, and it's really been very helpful linking in the rough sleepers with other networks which will support health and wellbeing.
Thanks, Fitz. Can I just jumping on the back of that, also Molly's question around the Domestic Abuse Act. I mean, we're still working on whether we there is new duties around homelessness in the Domestic Abuse Act, as Molly will know, and we're still pushing away to make sure we make a good, sensible link between the funding we're getting for that into making sure we're working with people within the refuges, and we're giving some resettlement advice to make sure that they're able to settle in safe accommodation, perhaps elsewhere, perhaps back in the homes that they came from in the first place. So there is some common sense work going on around connecting up those two strands, so that we can ultimately to provide the best outcomes for the people that find themselves in that position, including children and families, actually, in many cases. Let me go back, give it as an opportunity as well, as we've mentioned Julian House in the paper, but also as part of our way forward. What we're proposing is that we don't just see this as a council solution. It's very much about how we join up with our partner agencies, including the voluntary sector, Julian House, Lantern, Bus Shelter Projects, the National Organisation Shelter, for example. We work with all of them, and getting them to join up with housing associations and other statutory agencies is key to this. So I just wanted to stress that's the direction of travel around the action plan, is to do our bit, but also to make sure we join up with the rest of the people working around this field. Can I, while I've got the floor, can I just make the earlier point about local landlords? And again, Councillor Jones has asked a question about the no benefits tenants question, which I think has been answered. But I'd stress also we in order to get ahead of the pressures in the market with prices going up and things being unaffordable, we're looking to put more energy into the landlord forum to make sure we're engaging with local landlords to encourage them to take on residents who are perhaps struggling with maintaining a tenancy or about to be evicted by another landlord. We're trying to engage better with the landlord sector and lettings agency sector to make sure they're more willing and encouraged to take on our people, because that in itself will help to prevent homelessness and help prevent people being put into bed and breakfast and temporary accommodation. So that's another strand of the work we're doing.
I've got Daryl, and then Rebecca Knox, and then David Taylor.
Thank you, Andrew. Before my question, I just want to make a little comment on the lines of what you were talking about just now. We started off obviously with homelessness. We moved on to the increase in house prices. There's an impact on second homes in areas. There's availability of housing. Does the rental market change? How does it impact on the local plan? And as I've said many times, who's joining all this up? It's a real problem we got, because most of the reports still seem quite isolated, and probably rightly so, but somewhere in the grand scheme of things, we need to join all of this stuff, whether that's a senior leadership team or the cabinet. But I'd like to see somewhere somebody doing that job. Right, off the horse. My question was about the equality impact assessment, and what I'm looking at it is in light of the Armed Forces Covenant, and I can see nowhere in that EQA Armed Forces Covenant mentioned, or Armed Forces personnel or whatever. And I just wondering what the link should or could be within the EQIA and the Armed Forces Covenant. How are we tying those two things together? Thanks.
Can I answer the join the dots question, and then perhaps put over to Sharon on the Armed Forces?
Yeah. I think Daryl's raised a really good point, and I think this is partly, the reason why we have this overview committee. And I think, we touched on earlier regarding, things like the local plan, but I think, Daryl's absolutely right. How can we expand on it? But there we go, Andrew. I'll leave you to answer that bit.
I think it's a fair challenge. I just want to, I'd just come back with saying that's what the challenge to me, and obviously Councillor Carl Jones, is about making sure we have the kind of housing strategy which does join the dots between the various strands of what the council does, the corporate plan. So we are already making sure we're working hard on linking the next stage of the local plan, the planning local plan, to make sure it speaks to the housing agenda. But it's broader than that. It's all the adults and children's factors, health and well-being. That's very much what we need to be doing around developing the housing strategy. It's something that isn't narrow. It's something that's broad and fits as well as possible with the council's corporate plan objectives. So again, good challenge, I think, and we'll come back with something which will hopefully cover that request. Sharon, are you able to answer the question on the Armed Forces Covenant?
Yeah, just in so much as that on the EQIA, we've put a piece in there about the Armed Forces Covenant and customers, and we added an action to the action plan that will work with initially internal, but then external organisations to look at any and all challenges that people with any of the protected characteristics might experience in either their journey with regards to homelessness, the challenges that they face are specific to their needs and their background, and to check back those flows and make sure, once we've had those conversations with the people themselves, those service users themselves, and our own support, like I was saying, working perhaps with different equality groups. So the outcome of that information will be able to highlight to us if there is anything around, in this case, the armed forces that we're talking about, people that are service personnel or ex-service personnel, their families, people with injuries, etc., as a result of that service to the country. So we'll be able to look at that and make sure that all the process that we have in place don't mean that it's difficult for people. So we might have to put extra things in place, but we've included them as part of that action on the action plan.
Okay, thank you very much.
Fab. I'm going to be a bit cheeky. I'm going to go to, because I know that David's probably wanting to speak on this. I'm going to go to David Taylor, then I'm going to go to Rebecca, because I know that Rebecca will probably have something quite powerful to say.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, team. Excellent reports. I must say, it's quite outstanding to see the work that have been involved across Dorset and our council, to see how well we've been doing, and first-rate standard, I can say. Basically, I'd like to include the fact of involving the adult services and foster services, because the fact that they are a vast part of our concern regarding the fact of being involved in what's going on with regarding COVID, and relevant to what way we're going forward with their help. Can you enlarge on that, please, what way they've been involved? Thank you.
Apologies, I slightly broke out at the one part of the question. Was it a question? Perhaps Sharon, could you pick that up?
Do you want to restate it again?
Could you just, yes, please?
Yeah, just to state the fact is what involvement as we as council and officers to involve the foster selection services and the adult services to make sure they're totally involved with the COVID arrangements and the future for the education of the missing children that we've missed so far or are missing.
It was a fostering element I missed. I mean,
yes.
Just again, Sharon probably can speak about this, because it's linked back to the work we did on the housing allocations policy as well, I think. Sharon, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, as part of this particular piece of work with the homelessness rough sleeping strategy, we had some engagement with colleagues in both children's and adult services, and we took the feedback that they gave us to make sure that we were including the right teams and the links between teams, the transitioning from children's into adults. So they gave us feedback. We've included all of that. We've added those resources and those teams and those colleagues into the resources on the action plan, so that when we're looking at a particular piece of work, they've identified where they needed to be involved and they wanted to be involved and would improve that outcome. So we've made those amendments. I don't know if there's anything in particular that you might think we need to look at, but we've already done all that initial piece of conversation. So going forward, they would need to be actively involved.
That's right. That's what I think. Yeah, that's what I think I'm coming from, is to make sure it's actually, where is it being shown, so the fact that it's actually being able to be read, so that they feel as though, and we feel as though, that they're involved in the system as well, because it is a huge part of our action in Dorset and across the country, where the fact this service is being kind of like, you know, they're there, but they want to be actually involved to make sure they are actually part of it, and that's the important thing for us.
I think.
Tell you what, Andrew.
Teresa wants to speak, doesn't she? So,
yeah, we've actually got Teresa, and you know, for anything to do with our corporate children, fantastic. So Teresa's here, so I think she just quickly, if she wants to just
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Good to see you. Absolutely, we want to be talking with our foster care association. So we have a really new, fledgling but hugely energetic foster care association, a group of our own foster carers who are telling us from their best lived experience what it is we need to be doing and thinking about. We have had lots of conversations about, would it help our recruitment if we could offer an extension, etc., to people's accommodation. We think the best people to tell us about that are those foster carers who have come through the process themselves. So it's going to be on their agenda for what help would make the biggest difference, and they'll come back to us with that. So I'm happy to bring that forward to this committee at some point in the future, around just what are the other kind of support mechanisms that they're telling us that we should be focusing on.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. Outstanding.
Just squeeze an additional point in. I think part of the ongoing work around action plan, this is across the housing and children's services piece, is about making sure we're getting smart approaches to the housing register. So we've dealt with a case relatively recently of a young foster carer with I think sister, about how we just were smart about getting a housing solution for that individual. So we do this on a pretty much weekly basis across the housing and children's services teams. So it's been making sure we get smart and slick around doing that, so we're meeting those particular needs. So again, as Teresa said, more than happy to come back on that as a piece of good joined up working.
Thank you. Excellent. Lovely to hear.
Thank you, David. It's good to see you. I'm going to come to Rebecca now. Rebecca Knox.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And this might be straying slightly, so please, if there isn't a direct answer at the moment, then forgive me for straying. But I'm really interested in bringing and ensuring that housing stock that is available to us remains available rather than falls into disrepair. I imagine that we do or should have a register of housing which could be worked up to ensure that it is or could become available, whether that's with housing associations or with private landlords. But I and this is probably just instinctive, but there just seems to me to be an opportunity here for us to almost do a sort of home force activity, using, whether it's the voluntary sector or whether it's using micro businesses, because I reckon if each ward member walked around their patch, they would find quite a number of properties which either could be brought back into the market or are in need of just a little bit of help to ensure that that individual or family can stay in that property. And it just gets highlighted to me quite often that families are having to move out because they just need a damp proof course put in. And I think there's a place for us, or working with a charitable organisation, maybe it already is and I'm not aware of it, to join it up, provide those links, because I don't see it in a local community taking place. So I'm really this is one of the best documents I've ever seen, with so many times it's said early prevention, and that is wonderful. But this is what I'm on about. This is about early prevention, potentially for keeping people or freeing things up. And it might fall in objective 4 within the objectives plan, but it's not that obvious to me that it's happening, particularly with discussions with housing associations and our relationship with them.
Can I come back on that? I think that's an excellent line of thinking, actually. And you're probably in similar wavelength around prevention comes in many forms. So getting as far up, terrible jargon phrase, upstream with that is the better we can. So if it is a case of going and doing we sometimes get this with older people's accommodation, just getting a handy person to going and sort out some grab rails or some minor adaptations, keep somebody in the home, prevents a crisis situation. So that's something, if you've got thoughts around that, that's perhaps something we can tap into. There's lots of activity around community land trusts, for example, as many of you will know. We are aware of certainly neighbours and communities who are interested in helping on this topic. So the more we can join that up, the better. And on the broader point about empty homes, perhaps, is about how we work. We do push our housing association partners, particularly, but also with landlords which have derelict properties. We push them to make sure they're brought back into use or disposed of, and the money used to re-provide homes elsewhere. So that's something we do push people on. But certainly, just for the purposes of today, if you've got thoughts, Councillor Knox, about how we can connect up some real cases in real places, then that's something we're interested in doing, because it makes perfect sense to me.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Yeah, fab, thank you. That was again, excellent question by Rebecca. I knew it was worth waiting. Andrew, following on from Rebecca there, one of the things that I wanted to highlight was really, so if we go to something like page 60, page sort of 62, sorry, I really, for me, one of my concerns is around, and we know that we have it, is around the stranded patients, and they're stranded because they're stranded in hospital because they're homeless, and they become super stranded patients, and therefore they're occupying these hospital beds because they've either become ill and they can't go back to their home, and because their home just isn't suitable. But for me, it's a case of, well, why are we not pushing to see, and again, it's slightly out of your role, but perhaps more towards planning policy. We've got the local plan going on. Why are we not ensuring that the homes that are built in Dorset are far more accessible and disability friendly? Because I know that would make a massive dent to our delayed discharge of care figures and our stranded patients. And I know that you're partially having that conversation, but I think it's really for us again to push to say, actually, do you know what, we need decent accommodation. So if someone is therefore, if someone does get, say, taken ill, and they have to have their home adapted, it's easier to do, or it's already adapted in a way that you can get a wheelchair up a slope instead of having steps, etc. And I think that's really powerful. And it goes back to Daryl's point about joining up those gaps.
Thank you for that. I mean, it probably chimes with a lot of certainly the things I talked to Councillor Carl Jones about how we make sure that we're building as many, if you like, lifetime homes as possible, so people can stay in them for as long as possible throughout, and live a full life from throughout their life. There is a particular initiative going on at the moment called Harry's Pledge, around housing associations through the National Housing Federation, pledging to double the amount of so-called accessible homes that they're building as part of their programmes, which we're wanting to encourage. That's it's very much dependent on what the housing associations are building and what their architects are coming forward with. Because you're absolutely right, Councillor Kirby. If we can provide the type of homes which are right in the first place, but also that you can adapt more easily in the future, then that helps us with our housing demand. We have many cases, this is more on the housing register side, where might be a need for a disabled child or whatever, where the property it isn't possible to adapt it. It's not possible to extend it. Whereas if there was the ability to do that, it would mean that family wouldn't have to move and would be able to look after their child more effectively. So it makes a lot of sense. And certainly we are talking to planning colleagues about trying to get that to be reflected in our own planning policies, but very much also pushing the developers and the housing associations to make sure they're thinking on those lines too. Yeah,
I think if we could do a real steer to say to those housing developers and those private developers to say, look, stop sticking in steps everywhere, because it's not fair. So yeah, if that could be an outcome from today, that'd be amazing. Fab. Okay. All right. But going back to my earlier point, I think this has been really lovely because it's been out. We've owned this and we've grown it out from the start, and I think that's been really good. So it's nice to see it finally sort of come to a bit of a conclusion. I think taking Andrew's point and that it's a Dorset Council document, but there's a lot there for other organisations, and I think that having that clear guidance for those other organisations about how we're going to work for them is useful. If there are no further questions, I'm going to move on, and we'll go on to agenda item.
Chairman, just before
sorry, there's recommendations.
Oh yeah, should say.
Yeah, just say there's the recommendations. If you'd like to see a proposer in second for the notes.
Thank you. So I was just going to my notes and I've just seen that there's recommendations so we need a minded two, don't we? But the minded two is to give Andrew, there we go, that
so I'm new to this.
ability to be able to make the decision. Okay, all right then. So let me just bring up the words. Oh, come on. Sorry, I've got my notes outline. Okay. Okay, so the recommendation is to endorse the work. I'm just going to say it in one block. Endorse the work and recommend to full council the adoption of the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy for 2021-2026, and to delegate delegation of authority to the portfolio holder for housing and community safety to make minor amendments to the strategy and action plan and any amendments necessary to reflect legislative change. May I have the proposer for that, please?
So moved, Chairman.
Okay. Oh, there we go. There, Pauline. I've got Tony Alford in my screen. Tony, are you happy to second that? Fab. There we go. If there's no dissenters, then I'll just assume that we're all in favour.
Yeah. I think it's my role to take that forward, isn't it? So
yeah, there you go. You've got power and authority. Yeah. Go crazy. Don't blow it all at once.
It'll last about half a day. Thank you, everybody. Very useful comments as well. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I know that you've taken a lot on today because you've been, as I said, you've been Graham as well as yourself. So yeah, there was some good questions and a lot of things that are out of your jurisdiction, but yeah, actually were really important. So I'm happy that they were raised because I think it gives quite a clear. It's good that we talk about these things. It's part of our role as an overview committee. Okay, we're going to go to the agenda item 7, which is the People and Health Overview Committee review on grants, Dorset Council grants protocol. Let's come in here. So I've got Laura Cornett. As you're all aware, members, you may all comment on this because we've been the legal says so. So Laura, come on in, it's your baby. And I think we got Jill as well here, still here as well.
No, she wasn't here a few minutes ago unless she snuck in.
Okay, all right then, fine, it's all yours.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm here to ask the committee to consider the proposed grants protocol as to whether Dorset Council will adopt it as a baseline standard for all competitive grants offered to the voluntary community sector. So just a little bit of background for you. So following LGR, the colleagues and myself undertook a comprehensive review of all the historical grants issued to the voluntary community sector, and which many of you were involved in. So this included the competitive grants programmes that we've inherited from the 6 sovereign councils. So following public and community consultation, which took place between January and March 2020, the reports and findings and recommendations went to Cabinet on the 6th of October, which I've included as background paper 1. So the purpose of the review was to consider and harmonise the existing competitive grant programmes to the voluntary sector in existence before, and to harmonise these into a standardised grant programmes that make a positive and lasting difference in our communities, prioritise our resources and support the marginalised and underserved groups that we have across the Dorset Council area. The new grant funds, the new competitive grant funds are detailed in number 3 of the paper. So the grants protocol that we've developed, so administrating a grant scheme can be really complex, and due regard must be given to the important factors when developing and launching a scheme, such as predetermined criteria, the application process, assessment, shortlisting, principles, advertising, monitoring, etc. And it's vital that Dorset Council puts in place some adequate systems and processes to assess the suitability of grant applications in order to ensure a fair process and it's fully transparent. Obviously, we are looking after the public purse after all. It's important to say that the purpose of the grants protocol is to clarify the process and minimum standards for distribution of all competitive funds to the voluntary community sector. So if I just take you across now to Appendix 1 in the of the report, which is the proposed protocol. I just wanted to, it's very, very listy, so I don't want to go through all of it for you. But just to just to kind of go through a little bit of it. Oh goodness, sorry, I've just lost my papers now.
Yeah, okay. Bring on face-to-face meetings where we can actually just. It's such a juggle, isn't it?
It is definitely. Okay, so sorry, so yes, so I'm not going to go through the full protocol, but like I said, it's quite listy, but just to summarise, the protocol begins by explaining the scope and then how we will define the voluntary sector. It then goes on to say how Dorset Council will categorise grants either as a micro grant, which is up to £2,000, or a grant for those over £2,000. So those that are under £2,000, we have slightly less governance required because the risk is lower. The protocol then identifies what is not in scope of the protocol. And then next, the protocol lays out the minimum standards and process for the grant application, which will be also, all the information for the funds, for all funds, will be available through the Dorset Council website. The standard method for application is on an online application using the Dorset Council Case Viewer system, which has been developed during the pandemic. However, to ensure full accessibility, the grant fund will always either provide a paper copy or support the applicant with a digital champion to support with any applications for those people who are not online. The Dorset Council will not accept any applications that are submitted after the publicised closing date. And then I've gone on to talk about what all the application forms must include regarding fields, so the information that we require from the applicants. Next, it goes on to talk about what financial information we need from the organisations. So one of these, for example, is whether the organisation is currently in receipt of a Dorset Council grant. If it's a project, a basic breakdown of the costs, and whether match funding is required, and what percentage of the overall budget cost will be. So to ensure best value on project-based funds, Dorset Council expectation is that a minimum percentage contribution will be expected to match fund some of the grant application, but each fund will define that individually. Obviously, we talk about equality and diversity, so we expect applications to consider how their services and projects proactively consider how their provision is inclusive and support Dorset Council's delivery of our equality scheme. And then each fund will then have to offer thorough guidance, which I've gone on to detail there. I won't need to list all that for you, to give all applicants a fair opportunity and make sure they understand what the fund is about and how they can apply. Of course, then we go on to talk about compliance and supporting documents, because as I've already said, we must take utmost care of our public funds, and we will require certain evidence. So I've gone on to talk about what kind of documents we need, and of course, as I said previously, these are slightly different for a micro fund or a full grant. I've then gone on to talk about what we won't fund, and these include public bodies that carry out statutory obligations, the promotion of religious or political causes, retrospective funding, so for grants for works already been completed, organisations seeking to provide a bursary, one-to-one coaching or individual grants, organisations seeking to use grant funding outside the Dorset Council area, including Bournemouth, Crutches and Poole area. You'd be surprised how common that is. We have many applications from the BCP area because BCP Council don't offer as many grant funds as we do. Medical research and feasibility studies, organisations with excessive amounts of unrestricted funding, so which we would consider to be more than 12 months running costs. Organisations previously funded who have not completed their end of project report. So obviously we always want to get monitoring to assess the value of the project we've given. So if they don't submit that, it will make them ineligible going forward. And then projects duplicating existing commission service or provider in the same locality. Next, we've gone on to talk about the detail for the assessment process. And some of this includes applications will always be assessed by one or more officers using a scoring matrix, so similar to an employment process. We'll always do financial checks. The award will only be made in receipt of all the supporting documents and a signed agreement. Each assessment panel will consist of 2 specialised Dorset Council officers, one of them to act as the chair, the portfolio holder, and where possible, at least one representative from one external partner organisation. So, for example, Dorset Community Action or the Arts Development Company currently sit on some of our grant funds. The panel will assess each application against the fund criteria using a scoring matrix and agree and prioritise awards. Decisions will be made using a majority vote. Where there is no majority, the council's relevant portfolio holder will have the deciding vote, and the panel decision is final. Okay, there's others in there as well, but those are the highlighted ones for you, which I thought you'd be most interested in. I've then gone on to discuss the process for communication of the award and releasing of funding. So we will obviously always try to let organisations know within 6 weeks of the grant fund closing. And successful applicants will receive a grant offer letter, grant terms and conditions to which they need to sign and return prior to the start of any work happening. And there's some others in there as well. I've then gone on to talk about an appeals, complaints and feedback process. And then we've talked on to have gone on to talk about monitoring and evaluation. It's very important, obviously, for the public purse to gather monitoring and evaluation. We're not giving money for money's sake now. We have to make sure that our grants do give out and support our council plan. And then just data and sharing and promotion. So those were the main categories for now, and obviously open for any questions, comments and amendments.
Laura, thank you, fab. It's always good to have. I know that it was quite messy with all the grants over back when we were the separate sovereign councils, so it's great to have some consistency in the way that we approach and do it. I know we were having that discussion about, there's obviously quite a few of us that are involved in charities or local groups, etc. And I know full well that trying to get money or go for a grant is usually incredibly complex and quite soul destroying. So at least the one thing is in Dorset, at least it's consistent. Do I have any RTSs? Oh, there we go. I've got Rebecca and I've got Daryl. Rebecca, you're first.
Yeah, I do. Hi Laura, I'm so delighted that what we tried to do many years ago is coming to fruition.
Taking us a bit of time.
It is fantastic. But I have two questions. Forgive me if they're in there. I don't think they are. But one is a suggestion, and I know that there are many small organisations who don't have a bank account. They're not allowed to have a bank account. The bank account itself would put them off. And sometimes in the past, whether it's a ward member or somebody has offered to hold those funds for them. So I'm hoping that whether it's a town council, parish council, or a registered charity, if a small tiny project is asking for a grant, they can actually have their bank account as somebody else's bank account.
That's always what and we have had this a few times, particularly during the pandemic. So really tiny local organisations that have set up. Our official line is to work with the town and parish council, and there's, for example, I know Bridport Town Council are incredibly supportive of their really tiny groups, and they have lots of individual budget lines within their grants, and that would be the recommended governance we go down. We don't like to pay into an individual's bank account purely because obviously it leaves open for that individual to use the monies, and obviously just I recommend that members didn't do that as well, really, for your own.
No, that's fine, Laura. I just wanted that assurance because it looked like a bit of a blank. You must have your own bank account, but if they can have somebody who is almost there, the distributor and somebody who that we recognise and trust, that's brilliant. So
I will add that as a point of clarity. Thank you, Rebecca, because
thank you.
And then you had two, didn't you?
Yeah, the other one is actually looking backwards, I'm afraid to say, and you might know that this question was coming. There are some in the past who might have been given grants who haven't spent those grants, and I don't know where that money is now. But I'm just trying to ensure that we never have that again, that where we give a grant and that has not been spent, we get it back. There is a clawback for getting it back rather than it sitting around waiting to do something else.
Yeah, that's completely right, Rebecca. So all grants that have been given out officially from March this year, but I've been involved now since, well, quite a long time, but since LGR's happened, and it's kind of fallen under myself and my team. Every single grant that's been given out has full terms and conditions, and within that it states really clearly that if the grant is not spent during that time, they will need to return it. Now, we had a situation where we had round 5 of the Community Impact Fund, which round 4, just before COVID hit. So we issued out lots of project funding, and of course many of those projects couldn't happen because of COVID, and of course everything shut down. So we've been working really, really closely with those organisations, because we don't like to take the money back where there is going to be a community benefit. So many of them altered their projects slightly to make them COVID friendly, so delivered online rather than in person, or we've extended the deadlines for a further 12 months. So I've got 2 colleagues within my team who've been working very, very closely with many of these grant recipients to make sure that the money is used best for the communities. But I have had to recall 2 grants in the last 12 months because they haven't been able to deliver and are not in a position to be able to deliver. So sometimes we do have to. But now we have a much more auditable process for all grants. I know the grants you're talking about specifically, and obviously they were under one of the sovereign councils, and the paperwork was not as efficient as we would have liked it to be. However, that's now all been addressed with this process, and this protocol is the last. Well, going forward, sorry, Rebecca. Yes.
So you've got that, but have you got that? Can you recall what was out there from the previous sovereign council or not?
No, because the paperwork didn't enforce that, so we were unable to.
Okay. Thank you. I'll talk offline with you.
Thank you. Yes,
thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay. I've got Darryl.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a bit of a rodeo today because I'm going to get onto another horse. Local member involvement. Now, you might find it surprising, but a lot of local members understand and know these voluntary groups quite well, but we don't seem to be involved in the process anywhere. I just wonder if you can comment on that.
Okay, so my steer from Jill has been that it should be led through the portfolio holders, so either through herself or at Children's, which are the grant schemes available at the moment. If the panel here would like to talk about having local member involvement from an earlier stage in the application, so we could include comments before we go to panel from the members in support, then obviously I'm quite open to that. So this is what we've been working to for now, but I do appreciate what you are saying there, Darryl. And I know for capital grants, we do always speak to the local members, but you are right that the revenue grants we don't tend to. It's just assessed through the portfolio holder.
Yeah, I think with all respect to the portfolio holder, they don't know the various organisations and community groups throughout Dorset Council either. So I think local member involvement is important, really important. And I don't know what other members of the committee think. Over to them.
Oh, Darryl, I love the fact you just keep on getting on horses today. So I agree with Darryl. I think where I'm going with it is perhaps something slightly more formalised. So I was thinking we have our outside body representation, don't we, from Dorset Council? But is it a case where if we give a grant to, we obviously can't do it with all organisations, but I would feel in my world that if we're giving a substantial amount to an organisation, that we therefore, that as part stipulated in the grant, that there should be at least a Dorset Council representative on that. And I don't think that's reflected in the that's not really reflected in the paper. I don't know if that's where you were going with that, Darryl. I know that that's not quite, because you wanted that local member involvement as well.
I think that's the important thing, because if you're going to make a decision on a community or voluntary organisation, then probably the local member knows more about the organisation, what they do and how they work than anybody else.
Yeah, I like it, Darryl. How do we feed that? How do we feed that in? How will that work as a model? Everyone's agreeing.
Okay.
So I think Rebecca wants to speak. Rebecca, do you have the answer?
Just very briefly,
yeah.
I'm going to put two things forward. One is, I get the member involvement, and I think we have to assume here that members act truthfully, honestly, and professionally, and even if they dislike what that organisation is going to do, they will support it because they know that it's not actually a fraudulent application, or as far as they are aware. So I can see some members of the community saying, "Oh, that wretched councillor, no, they mustn't get involved in this because they might not appreciate what we're trying to achieve." That's not, I think, the point that we're trying to make here. It's just to ensure that it's credible, whatever that organisation's trying to do. But I absolutely believe that of the importance in local ward engagement of some kind, because I have heard, and it is only third party, that during COVID there were some quite strange applications to our grant funding for so-called businesses which didn't actually exist, or sadly bought premium bonds with the money. So I do think there is a safeguarding need for that eyes and ears of the community, and maybe look to how the COVID funds were done, but not. There's something else that needs to be put in there? That's what I'd say.
Okay, so the business grants were completely separate to our grants that we gave out to the voluntary community sector. So I think that's, I understand what Rebecca's saying there, but I think that was possibly hopefully a one-off situation, and that was administered within our revenue and benefits team. So this protocol is specifically talking about competitive grants to the voluntary community sector. Thinking on my feet slightly here, and to respond to Darryl, I would like to propose that we add, so as we receive the applications in, we can do a small summary of the project rather than sending a full application form, and send that to the local member for comment prior to the assessment panel. How does that feel as a bit of a middle ground, Chair? I don't know if you think that's it.
Could I come in there, Andrew?
Yeah, go on then, Daryl.
Yeah,
I'm
looking more to page 301, which gives you the assessment process. I think it's the 1, 2, 3, 4.
So right now I'm going to go through it.
6th bullet point. No, 7th bullet point. It talks about the panel will assess each application. Now, somewhere around there, I think we need to add that the local member view is given to that panel.
Yeah, and that's what the process that I was talking about there. So before we get to panel, we would already have the local member view, because we only have an hour or so for the panel meetings usually. So if we can establish the member support or not for the project or organisation prior to that panel and include that for the overall assessment.
I think if that could be added to the assessment process, so it's there in black and white as a bullet point, then I'll be happy with that. Yeah,
that's fine. I can add that in, Daryl. No problem.
That's of course if the committee agrees, but they haven't yet.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you, Daryl. And I think that the majority of members are, and if they're not, they can speak in the bar now. Yeah, I think that's a neat solution. Well done, Daryl. Well done, Laura.
And then can I also just add that if we are to do that, just because we're usually quite time pressured, can we give 5 days to that to be turned around? So then members would need to commit to making, they would only be short summary comments on the project.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the right thing, and I think that's the way members are used to usually commenting on things. You know, whether it's like housing or something like that, or a licensing application. It's just So I think that's fair, and it would just be a short comment. And then obviously, if the committee wanted to hear from that councillor, then they could invite that councillor in, I suppose. I'm not quite sure how the little panel works, but I think that's a neat solution, and I think the majority. I think there's nobody that's dissenting. So good work, Daryl. Well done. You did good. You did good. Right. Are there any further questions? Because I'm going to raise one or two. Difficult to see what's in the meeting chat. So the only point that I have, and so this is a bit of a scrutiny thing, is going back to the level of insurance. Now this sounds really boring, but I think for me personally, £5 million is quite an excessive amount of liability insurance, because it all depends on what that organisation is doing. I think that perhaps there should be a bit of a sliding scale. Like, I know that the majority of smaller organisations, 2 million would be like the maximum amount that they will have, and that would actually suit the majority of their needs. There's a massive jump in price between 2 million and 5 million, and if we're asking organisations to be able to meet that criteria by saying, look, you can apply for this, but you've got to have, but being able to then evidence that you've got that £5 million worth of liability insurance, it could be crippling, because we're talking like thousands of pounds usually just in insurance premiums alone. So I don't know, I mean, whether or not we have on a sliding scale, or perhaps there's a way of doing it so if an organisation is successful, then we can just ensure that they get that provide that level of insurance. That might be the nicer way of doing it. I don't know, Laura.
So we have done that previously. So we have, as part of a grant, so for a very small organisation who only has, for example, £2 million worth of public liability insurance, but then the project would kind of, because they'll be working with lots of young people, or whatever the project is, we have allowed them to use part of their grant to buy that insurance. We have raised this with our legal team several times, and they are adamant that that is the minimum that people would need, and there is a threshold. I mean, I can go back and re-look at it, because we, as officers as well, we have raised concerns that we thought it does create a barrier to applying to grants for some people. So with the micro grants, it's as appropriate, so for the fund. So if it is a tiny grant, so if it's £500, you know, to support a piece of equipment going into a youth centre, then you know that they won't, it's not eligible. It's really only for those that are kind of more revenue funded, which includes for example, a support officer or something along those lines, which are the larger grants that we give out. But yes, we have sought advice on this from like quite high up on our legal teams at Dorset Council. They're not keen to budge. Yeah, no, that seems fair. Just as long as there's that discretion. I just didn't think that was clear in the paper. That was all. Okay, thank you. Yes, I'll make that clearer. Okay, all right. I've got David Taylor, and then we'll bring this item to a close.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Chair and Board. Excellent, Chair. Glad to see that Daryl's hit it right on the head there, the involvement of the small people, the people that can't be heard or will not be heard. Just to say the fact is that it is important that the democratic process is adhered to everybody, so that we all have a say and make sure that we involve in Dorset and, of course, all of our environments and our organisations. Just to emphasise the fact, as I said, Andrew, the fact that we're not left behind, that we have a choice at the table to say what's going on and can we help. That's the thing, to be involved. Thank you. That is it. Thank you. All right, fab. All right. I'm not going to repeat what Daryl's just put in the chat. All right. Okay. Let's bring this item to a close. There, I'm not going to make the same mistake as last time. Let me just check that what the recommendations are. Okay. So we've members of the People and Health Overview Committee. Consider the proposed grants protocol for the decision on whether Dorset Council adopts it as a baseline standard for all competitive grants offered to the voluntary community sector. So I think we have done our bit and we have considered it.
Chairman,
Laura?
Sorry. It's Lindsay, just to say, I think, and Laura will correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that obviously you've given your comments, which Laura will take away, but the decision will be taken by Councillor Jill Haynes, portfolio holder. Yeah, that's why I'm not proposing or seconding it. It's just considering. Just for the people watching the live stream today. Yeah, I thought I'd look for once I managed to get it right. Daryl, did you stuck in a quick RTS? Is it in relation to the committee, to the item, or has he gone? Daryl?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. No, it's just the fact that Lindsay just mentioned it. If Jill was here, then it's just to ensure the minded to decision included the recommendation we made to change that or add to that assessment process. Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it's gone. I think it's gone down, Laura, and I think that will go across. But yeah, it's just an item to consider. But I think we've done our bit. Yeah, so I'll add two bits in. So clarification about bank accounts for very, very tiny organisations as put forward by Councillor Knox. And then add in the local member involvement as part of the process prior to the assessment panel, which would be via a summary within a short summary of the project. And obviously, if members would like more information, obviously we can always provide more. But otherwise, you'll be inundated with big application forms, which I don't think many of you have got time to read. And I'll add both of those in as part of the process and then forward it to Councillor Haynes for confirmation. Fabulous, Laura. Thank you very much. I know that it's actually quite a nice, concise document, and I know that it's obviously taken a while to get here. So thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you very much for hearing it, and I think it's really, really important that Dorset Council gives out our funding. Well, I will. And that's what my team have been working towards. You know, the whole programme. We've done a lot of work since LGR. To try and make this process fair for everybody, and this is kind of one of the smaller pieces of work, but really, really vital to ensure that it's fair and equitable across the patch. Thank you. Sorry. No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. All right. Thank you, Laura. We'll move on now. We'll leave this item behind, and we'll go to. Here we go. So agenda item 8, which is the committee and cabinet forward plan. Does any member have any questions about the forward plan or any items that they believe are missing? you can see that the 4 plan is slowly beginning to get filled up with some of the COVID stuff, which is good, and the council's response and learning from, which is brilliant. Fab.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Rebecca.
I was trying to look at the big version, but timing I might not be able to. So I just want to double check that this committee has the development of the ICS on its forward plan probably for before the end of the year.
I'm happy to stick it on because I think that's incredibly important. I know the work's going on. I think it's just, as you say, it's the issue around timeframes. So yeah, whether or not we do it with a date or whether we just have ICS TBC.
It could be. I think what is important for this committee to be understanding will be the role of your oversight of what it achieves for people and health and housing and the local plan and everything else, in terms of where it fits in with potential governance arrangements, but also it will affect the finances of the council and some of our policies. So maybe it's a workshop, Chairman, just to gain a fuller understanding, and therefore then you can decide whether it needs to come as a formal item to the committee for formal recommendation to cabinet. I'm just speaking off the top of my head at the moment, but for it not to come to this committee or discussion would seem a bit odd to me.
Yeah, I agree. Something like that, because it has to be. I mean, the whole thing is it's integrated, and that involves the whole of the council. Daryl's put, I think the work should would be. He says for the whole council. I think that they're probably, off the top of my head, I'm assuming that there will be a workshop for the whole council anyway, but I think we need to do a little bit of a deeper dive. I think it would probably be, again, a workshop purely because for a lot of members, like, there's a lot there. There is a lot there, and it's quite complex. So I wonder if we might just spend a day, perhaps not half a day or something like that, just having a bit more of a deep dive into the ICS and how we can just ensure that, you know, that we're going to be doing our things in Dorset Council and that it's all linking up nicely.
Well, would you mind taking that away and maybe we can discuss? And it's probably a September-y discussion.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Let's stick it in now then, so we remember, and it's there for the officers to see. So if we say, Lindsay, can we just make a note to stick in ICS? Okay. We won't give it a date, but if we aim for sort of November time.
That's fine, Chairman. I've made a note and we can have a discussion with officers about timescales.
You're amazing. You're amazing. Okay, all right. And that brings us nicely. Yeah, go on.
Andrew, before you leave, I've put an RTS. I can't see if Jill's in the meeting or not. Could you, when you have your workshop, invite scrutiny as well? Because following your overview, at some time we might have it as scrutiny. And it would be useful if we were invited to your workshop. Yeah,
I'll tell you what I'll do then. If I do, if we do a workshop and then have it a little bit open, so I'll invite scrutiny, and then we'll open up to anyone that's actually interested, because then that always works in well, because then you've got people that actually care coming along. So yeah, I'm happy to do that, Molly. I think that's all good. Fab. Okay. All right. We are a whole 7 minutes early, which is nice. I'm going to love you and leave you and bring the meeting to a close. Leslie's sticking some words about, do we want to add in bits like home first and care homes? Oh, yeah, that'd be good. We'll do that as well. Because that can come in under ICS. But yeah, all right, okay.
No.
No, too difficult.
It's too much.
Yeah, fine, all right.
I mean, it is important, Andrew. It's really important. But actually, what concerns me just at this moment in time is for people to understand what is could be a very complex structure, but where our role is in the future.
I'll tell you what. Let's have a bit of special time together, us two. Special time. We're just two. Yeah.
Time.
So if we have that,
Okay.
then we'll just agree with what's going to go on, and we'll work between the two committees.
Brilliant.
But
Thanks,
yeah, Leslie, that's on hold for the moment, but we'll see. Then we can actually see what we actually need to come in, and we'll have a bit of a proper chat. But everyone, thank you very much. That was really kind. Thank you to the presenters that came along today, because it was quite in depth earlier, especially with some of the children's stuff. We could have done that for I reckon we could have done that for years. But the answers are very concise, and it's really nice to see Vic and Andrew and the rest of the housing team have been fabulous. So thank you very much.